She called out her husband's baby trap joke in front of everyone, and now he won't speak to her. He looked her in the eye, surrounded by friends, and called her a liar. Not privately. Not gently. At the dinner table, with a laugh, like it was just a funny little observation and not one of the worst things you can accuse your partner of. She had carried his child, built a home with him, married him, and in that moment he decided to make her the punchline of a joke that accused her of manipulation, deception and calculated trap setting. And everyone at that table heard it. The silence that followed must have been unbearable. You know that specific kind of quiet where everyone suddenly becomes very interested in their food and no one wants to make eye contact. Where someone picks up a glass just to have something to do with their hands. Where the ambient noise of the room seems to dip slightly, like even the background conversation sensed that something real just happened. That is the silence that tells you something real just happened and everyone felt it. Everyone at that table made a split-second calculation about whether to laugh, whether to look at her, whether to look at him, and most of them chose to look at nothing at all. That is the silence of collective discomfort. That is the silence of witnesses. So let's go back to the beginning, because this story deserves to be understood properly. These two were teenagers when she got pregnant. 19 years old, in what sounds like a genuine relationship, 4 years deep at the time. Think about that for a second. 4 years at 19 means they started dating around 15. This was not a casual situationship or a brief fling. This was a high school relationship that had already survived the kind of years that destroy most teenage couples. They knew each other. They had history. She was on the implant, which for anyone who does not know is one of the most effective forms of birth control available. The failure rate is incredibly low, somewhere under 1% per year. Getting pregnant on the implant is not a plan. It is a statistical anomaly. It is lightning striking when you had an umbrella up and were standing inside a building. The implant was physically in her arm. The doctors had to remove it when they found out she was pregnant. If she had engineered this pregnancy, she would have had to engineer a medical miracle inside her own body without telling anyone. And for what reason exactly? That is where his little joke completely collapses under the weight of its own stupidity. Because here is the thing about a baby trap accusation. It only makes sense if the person doing the trapping had something to gain. That is the entire logic of the accusation. Someone lures someone else into a pregnancy because the other person has money, status, security or power that the trapper wants access to. That is the theory. So when she hit him with those questions in response, she was not being cruel. She was dismantling the accusation using the most basic logical framework available to any thinking adult. What exactly did she trap him for? His money? She came from the wealthier family. His house? They were living in her parents' property. His car? He did not even have a license. There was nothing to trap him for. The joke does not just fail to land. It fails to make any sense at all when you examine it for more than 3 seconds. The accusation requires a motive. She had none. It requires an opportunity. The implant removes that. It requires a power imbalance that favored him. The opposite was true. The whole architecture of the accusation is built on a foundation that does not exist in their actual story. And the timing of the joke is its own kind of cruelty. They are now 25. They have been together for a decade. They have 3 children. They are married. They bought a house together. They have built an entire life. At what point in the last 10 years did he think this observation was sitting there waiting to become party conversation? That is what makes this so strange and so unsettling. It did not come from nowhere. Something in him decided that this was a good moment, a fun moment, a moment to make a joke that paints his wife as a manipulative schemer in front of people who do not even know the history of their relationship. These were new friends. People who had no frame of reference for who she was, how long they had been together, what she had contributed or what she had sacrificed. They just heard a husband imply his wife tricked him into fatherhood. That is the impression he chose to leave. And that says something. Let me be honest about something here. There is a big difference between a joke that lands wrong and a thought that finally escaped. Drunk words or sober thoughts is a phrase that exists because people recognize something true about what happens when the filters come down. Now, she herself said in her edit that she does not believe he genuinely thinks she trapped him. And I want to respect that, because she knows him and we do not. She has 10 years of data on this person and we have a Reddit post. But that does not mean the joke was nothing. Even if it came from a place of joking rather than genuine belief, he still chose that topic. He still chose her as the punchline. He still said, in front of new friends who did not know their story, that he suspects his wife of one of the more insulting things you can accuse a partner of. The joke reveals something, even if it is not a confession. At minimum, it reveals that somewhere in him, this framing of their beginning exists as a thing he can reach for when he wants a laugh. And that is worth sitting with. Now let's talk about her response, because that is technically what this post is asking about. She fired back immediately, publicly, and systematically. Did she baby trap him for his money, his house, his car? The questions came out rapid fire. No hesitation. No pulling him aside. She did it right there at the table, in front of the same people who had just heard the joke, which meant they also got to hear the dismantling. And here is the thing. He started it. He made a public accusation disguised as a joke and she responded with a public rebuttal disguised as sarcasm. She gave him exactly the energy he sent her, just sharper and better aimed. Is that ideal? No. Could she have handled it more calmly? Probably. But is she wrong for responding at all? Absolutely not. Think about what the alternative would have been. She could have laughed it off. She could have gone quiet. She could have let it sit there while everyone at the table mentally filed away the information that her husband thinks she trapped him. She could have pressed her lips together and stared at her plate and counted the seconds until dinner was over, then cried in the car on the way home while he drove in blissful unawareness of how deeply it had landed. She could have waited until they got home to address it privately while their new friends went home wondering what they had just witnessed. And what would that have communicated? It would have communicated that this is something she accepts. That when he says something like that she absorbs it and moves on. That the joke lands without consequences. That she is someone who can be publicly diminished and will not flinch. She chose not to do that. What I find genuinely interesting about this situation is the aftermath. He gave her the silent treatment. One-word answers. He was upset. And I want to be careful here because there is something valid in that upset, even if he brought it on himself. Being publicly embarrassed is genuinely uncomfortable, and even when you cause your own embarrassment there is still a sting to it. That hot-faced, tight-chested feeling of having a moment go wrong in front of people whose opinion you care about is real, regardless of how you got there. But the asymmetry of the situation is glaring. He publicly accused her of something deeply insulting and she embarrassed him by dismantling the accusation logically. He then went cold on her for it. She was the one who was accused, she was the one who had to sit at a table and hear her husband imply she is a manipulator, and somehow she ended up being the one apologizing first. She did apologize, by the way. She said so in her edit. She apologized for embarrassing him and he apologized for the joke. Good. That is how adults handle things. But I think it matters that the edit also confirms he clarified the situation to the friends afterward, which means he acknowledged the joke was wrong enough to need correcting. He did not stand by it. He did not say, "Oh no, I meant it." He walked it back. So somewhere in him he knew it had gone too far. That walk back matters. It tells you he understood, maybe belatedly and maybe only because she forced the moment of accountability, that what he had said was not acceptable. The correction does not erase the original comment, but it does suggest he is capable of recognizing the line, even if only after he has already crossed it. But here is what still lingers for me even after the resolution. 10 years is a long time to be with someone. 3 children is a deep commitment. A shared home, a shared life, a shared decade of real events and real support. Sleepless nights and school runs and grocery lists and arguments and reconciliations and all the ordinary intimacy that stacks up into something that is supposed to be unshakable. And somewhere in that decade, whether as a genuine belief he buried or as a thoughtless joke he let out, the idea existed in him that she had engineered their first pregnancy. That is not a small thing. Even as a joke, it reveals a way of framing their origin story that casts her as the architect of something he did not fully choose. It reframes the beginning of their family as something that happened to him rather than something they built together. And that reframing is worth a real conversation, not just an apology and a subject change. She deserved better than that dinner table moment. She has been his partner for 10 years and the mother of his 3 children and the person whose family resources helped build the life they share. The joke was not just unfunny. It was ungrateful, it was inaccurate, and it was aimed at someone who had done nothing but love him and build with him for a decade. Let me be very clear about the verdict here. She is not the problem in this story. Not even close. She responded to a public insult with a public rebuttal that happened to be airtight and completely accurate. If he did not want to be embarrassed by the answers, he should not have asked the question. She did not create the awkward moment at that table. He did. She just refused to absorb it quietly. The phrase she used is exactly right. Do not dish it out if you cannot take it. He made a joke at her expense in front of an audience. She responded in kind. He did not like how it felt. And that discomfort is the entire lesson. When you make your partner the punchline of a joke that accuses them of something dishonest and manipulative, you do not get to be the one who sulks afterward. You made the mess. You do not get to be upset that she refused to sit in it alone. She has nothing to apologize for in terms of her fundamental response. The only thing remotely debatable is the public setting, and even that is forgivable given that he created the public setting to begin with. She defended herself. That is not cruelty. That is self-respect. And frankly, he is lucky she loves him enough to have stayed at that table at all. A new nurse thought she was watching an affair and got herself fired before learning the truth. She walked into that HR meeting absolutely convinced she was doing the right thing. She had seen something she believed was wrong, she had told people about it, she had opinions and she was ready to defend them. And then a man sat across from her and introduced himself as the woman's father and her entire reality collapsed in real time. That moment of mortification must have been something to witness. The new nurse, fresh to the job, still in her probationary period, sitting in an HR office ready to talk about the affair she had apparently uncovered, and then having to recalibrate everything she thought she knew in front of the very people she had accused. Picture her face in that exact second. The way the blood probably drained from it. The way her mouth must have opened and then closed because there was simply nothing in her brain that had prepared her for that specific sequence of words coming out of that specific man's mouth. The apologies started immediately. But the damage was already done, and everyone in that room knew it. Let's lay out what actually happened here so we understand it clearly. The social worker and her dad work at the same small hospital. By her own account, pretty much everyone at that hospital knows he is her father. This is a small workplace, the kind where people know each other's business, where the charge nurse's wife brings him lunch sometimes, where relationships between staff are common knowledge, where the same faces appear in the break room every morning and small talk fills in all the gaps that a formal introduction might miss. A new nurse joins the team and does not yet have that context. She is still learning names, still figuring out the rhythms of the floor, still trying to understand who reports to whom and who is friends with whom and what the unspoken rules are. She observes a hug, she hears a joke about an expensive steak and whose turn it is to pay. She sees a man she knows is married interacting warmly and privately with a younger woman, and she draws a conclusion. A wrong conclusion. A spectacularly, embarrassingly, professionally catastrophically wrong conclusion. Now here is where it gets complicated. Because drawing a wrong conclusion is human. People misread situations constantly. What made this specific wrong conclusion into a fireable offense was what the new nurse did next. She did not sit on it. She did not let the discomfort of uncertainty settle for even a day or two while she gathered more information. She did not ask someone who might know the context. She did not approach the social worker or the charge nurse directly. She immediately began telling other staff members that the charge nurse was having an affair with the hospital social worker. She spread it as fact. She gossiped about it to her coworkers as if she had witnessed something real and damning, speaking with the kind of quiet certainty that makes a rumor feel credible even when it is built on absolutely nothing. And she did this about people she had barely interacted with, at a job she had been at for fewer than 90 days. That is not an innocent mistake. An innocent mistake is thinking two people are a couple when they are actually siblings. An innocent mistake is misreading a situation and keeping it to yourself or quietly asking someone you trust whether you understood correctly. What this nurse did was active. She made a choice to broadcast what she believed she saw, and she broadcast it in a professional environment about a colleague and a senior staff member, and the thing she broadcast was that they were engaged in an extramarital affair. In a hospital. About the charge nurse. That is not a small rumor. That is the kind of rumor that can damage careers, strain marriages, and alter how someone is perceived by every person who hears it before the truth comes out. Once a rumor like that exists in a small workplace, it does not stay contained. It moves through hallways and group chats and shift handoffs, changing slightly with each retelling, hardening into something that feels like established fact even when it is entirely fiction. The social worker's reaction is interesting to examine. She heard what was happening through another nurse who came to tell her directly, and when she did, she had to sit with the particular kind of fury that comes from being lied about in your own workplace by someone who does not even know you. Not just lied about in a general sense, but accused of something that would reflect on her character, her professionalism, and her relationship with her own father. She made a deliberate choice. She did not confront the new nurse herself. She went straight to HR. Her mom later said she should have just talked to the new nurse directly, that going to HR when she knew the outcome would likely be termination was too severe. And I understand that perspective. It is the gentler option. Give someone a chance to learn the lesson privately before escalating to the institution. But I also understand why the social worker did not see it that way. She is a hospital social worker. She knows how institutions work. She knows what HR exists to handle. And more than that, she was dealing with a situation where her professional reputation and her relationship with her father were being actively discussed across the staff in a way she had no control over. Every hour that passed was another hour the rumor had to travel further and take root more deeply. The longer that conversation existed without a formal correction, the further it spread and the harder it became to fully contain. Going to HR was not an escalation out of vengeance. It was a calculated decision to address the situation through the proper channels quickly and completely, with documentation, with witnesses, and with an outcome that would put the matter fully to rest rather than leaving it to simmer. I want to take a moment here because, wow, the audacity of walking into an HR meeting and describing in detail why you think a man is terrible for apparently having an affair, while that man is sitting right there about to explain he is the woman's biological father. That is a level of social disaster I would not wish on anyone, and yet it is entirely self-inflicted. The outcome was that the new nurse was fired. She was still in her 90-day probationary period, which exists precisely so that employers can make decisions about fit before a position becomes permanent. The hospital decided she was not a fit. And honestly, the reasoning makes sense. If a brand new employee, who has not yet proven herself in the role, immediately begins spreading serious rumors about a senior staff member and a colleague based on something she misunderstood and did not bother to verify, what does that tell you about her judgment? What does it tell you about how she will handle sensitive information in a job where sensitive information is everywhere? It tells you that when she is unsure about something, Her instinct is not to pause and think but to talk, loudly and quickly, to as many people as will listen. Hospitals run on trust. They run on discretion. Patients share their worst moments with nurses and social workers and doctors and expect confidentiality and professionalism in return. A nurse who sees something ambiguous and immediately turns it into staff gossip without pausing to check her assumptions is demonstrating a pattern of behavior that has real implications for a healthcare environment. The specific content of the gossip almost does not matter. The impulse to gossip at all, quickly and publicly, is the problem. And it showed up on day, let's say, 65 of 90. The social worker's mom brings up the fact that the new nurse is a single mom, and that detail is clearly meant to add weight to the idea that the firing was too harsh. And I do feel for that circumstance genuinely. Losing a job is serious and losing it early is especially painful, and the financial and emotional weight of being a single parent means the stakes of every professional decision are higher and the consequences of losing income fall harder. But sympathy for someone's personal situation cannot be the determining factor in whether they face professional consequences for professional behavior. She is a single mom who spread a harmful and false rumor about her coworkers. Both of those things are true at the same time. The first does not cancel out the second. The social worker was right. She was right to take it to HR. She was right to let the institution handle it. She was right to protect her own reputation and her father's in the quickest and most thorough way available to her. And the new nurse, while she deserves compassion for the difficulty of her situation, was not done wrong. She made a decision in those first weeks on the job that revealed how she handles uncertainty and information, and the hospital made a decision in response. That is how probationary periods work. Here is the bottom line. The new nurse did not lose her job because she made an honest mistake. She lost her job because her response to an honest mistake was to gossip. She skipped every reasonable step, every decent instinct toward verification or discretion, and went straight to telling people something damaging that she had not confirmed. She turned a misunderstanding into a rumor and a rumor into an HR meeting, and the only person who engineered that chain of events was her. The social worker simply declined to pretend it had not happened. Not the jerk. Not even a little bit. Her father is embarrassed and her mom is sympathetic to a stranger on Facebook, but the social worker did exactly what any reasonable professional would have done when someone began spreading false and damaging rumors about them at work. She took it seriously. The hospital took it seriously. And the nurse learned a very expensive lesson about the difference between assuming something and knowing it. Drop a comment telling me which story messed you up more. I genuinely need to know. And if you want more of these, a like and subscribe costs you nothing.